day. Call of Duty started off strong and continued being strong until it got super popular. And when it became super popular, sadly, it became a throwaway game series. When they started coming out with Call of Duties, every year each game had to be simplified to the point where you could pretty much just play it and then throw it out for all the replayability it had. Now, it didn't start becoming a throwaway game series until after Call of Duty 4 and the game we're reviewing today, Call of Duty World at War. Call of Duty World at War is a World War II first-person shooter running an enhanced version of the Infinity Ward engine. And by the great Telos, do the graphics for the game look pretty damn good. This is another example of a graphics plateau game, as they have not aged hardly at all in the 9 goddamn years since its release. Where does the time bloody well go? The weapon models still look kick-ass and are filled with little details like scratch stocks and metal. The enemies still look highly detailed and have good animations. Level textures still hold up as well, and individual textures, while a bit low res, still look at the very least halfway decent. And thankfully the levels are still designed to be played in and thus are more than 2 bloody corridors. They are not as big as the COD 2 levels, but they are still large enough to be fun. And there are still secrets of all things to be found. Yep, you heard me right, ladies and gentlemen. Secrets in a Call of Duty game. Who knew Call of Duty could be more than just run forward to a cutscene? The secrets will usually have weapons and ammo, and in this game, you need every little advantage you can get, because there is still challenge. Sure, there is regenerative health, but you have only a little bit of it, and the enemies can do a shitload of damage to you. They are armed with a variety of powerful weapons and will actually shoot at you accurately from long distances. And like in the previous good Call of Duty games, they will chuck grenades at you all the bloody time. And when I say all the bloody time, I mean every time you try to get to cover, in comes a bloody grenade. But it gets worse, ladies and gentlemen. In the Japanese campaign, the Japanese soldiers will banzai charge you all the bloody time as well. And they can actually take you to the bloody ground and try to stab you with a bayonet. And you have only a tiny window to fend them off with your knife. Treyarch, I don't think you quite get how a modern-day Call of Duty game is supposed to be. In a modern-day Call of Duty game, the AI is supposed to have all the fun, and all the players should have to do is hit F. Smoke grenades make a return, and they are just as useful here as they were in Call of Duty 2, as there are numerous mounted gunners to fight. Ammo is a little more limited than in previous games, and you have to constantly watch your ammo reserves. You know it, you love it, it's weapon review time! There are numerous cool weapons to be found in the game. However, since this game actually has challenge, using the right weapon at the right time will make all the difference. For example, if you have a bolt-action rifle and run into a squad of troops, they will cut you to ribbons in short order. The best weapons in the game are the ones that have high firing rates and high ammo capacity. You start the game with a Nambu pistol that is almost immediately discarded for two much better weapons, the Caliber 30 M1 and the Type 100 submachine gun. The Caliber 30 M1 needs no introduction, as it was and is in the game one of the best rifles of all time. It holds 8 rounds and is powerful and quick to reload. One thing that differentiates this game from most others is the fact that you can reload in the middle of a clip, and for once, clip is used correctly here. You get a really cool animation of a half-empty clip being ejected and a fresh one being inserted. The Type 100 machine gun is a new one for World War II shooters. This was Japan's only submachine gun of the entire war. It fired the rather anemic 8mm Nambu cartridge and was a very, very rare gun in Japanese service. And at most, keep that in mind, 27,000 were manufactured. In this game, it's about as common as the MP40 is on the German side. And I have no problem with this whatsoever. This game is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fast-paced, and it wouldn't be that fun and fast-paced if you didn't have submachine guns. So what if there are way too many Type 100s? That's the only Japanese submachine gun that actually existed in World War II, and I'd rather them use that instead of some sort of made-up gun. Really, if you want an accurate infantry simulator for World War II, Red Orchestra has got you covered. In the game, the Type 100 works more or less like the MP40, and it's going to be your go-to gun for much of the Japanese campaign, as it has plentiful ammo, and most importantly, it allows you to engage numerous targets. Most of the other weapons work as you would expect. The MP40 and Thompson are still great, the various bolt-action rifles are sadly useless for this kind of gameplay, and you have some automatic rifles like the BAR and Type 99. They are slow to reload, but pack some serious firepower. That being said, you're still better off with the Type 100 or M&P 40. The Gewehr 43 returns, and is a very useful rifle in levels that have scarce automatic weapons. The PPSH 41 returns as well, and is a beast! It has a good firing rate and a massive drum magazine, but like with any allied weapon, its ammo is somewhat scarce. The STG-44 also returns and is the win the game button, but it only appears in the very last levels of the game. What makes this game stand out is the fact that it actually introduces some new weapons to the COD franchise. We finally get not one, but two boomsticks. You get the Winchester 1897 Trent shotgun. That is in theory badass, but since it's a video game shotgun, its range is limited, and you're still better off with a submachine gun. You can then find a double-barreled shotgun, and it's cool and is devastating at close ranges, but 2 shots is just not enough when having to fight whole armies of enemies. You then get a Flammenwerfer, the M2 flamethrower to be specific. In real life, these were as close to a BFG as you were likely to get, and they used a stream of flammable liquid. This flamethrower, like most other video game flamethrowers, shoots some flame about 10 feet, and that's it. It's useful here and there, but as is the old refrain, give me a submachine gun, or barring that, a Maschinengewehr. These are completely and totally historically inaccurate. But then the only people who care about that breathe Cheeto dust instead of air. You have the M1919 in the Japanese campaign, and you have the MG42 in the Russian one, and these work just like man-portable machine guns in COD 4. In real life, the US military tried to field a stocked version of the venerable M1919, but it was found to be way too heavy. But in the game, it tears through the enemy like they were bloody made of cheesecloth. The MG42 is actually magazine-fed, and like the M1919, dominates the battlefield. Of all the weapons in the game, these are my favorites. The FG42 shows up for all of one level, and it works well enough, but you don't really use it enough for it to matter all that much. The Mosin returns to its COD 1 form with the turn-down bolt, and I have no problem with this since it looks really cool. And hell, if I jumped on the Mosin craze when they were cheap, I would have converted an M44 to COD standard. Lastly, we have this, the PTRS-41, an anti-tank rifle that is now inexplicably a semi-auto sniper rifle. It works well and it's fun to use. Remember, fun to use. If you want realism, you can kindly go play some Red Orchestra 2 where it's handled realistically. So yeah, the guns, excellent. But what about the rest of the gameplay? In addition to just basic fun and gunning goodness, you have sniping missions that are actually challenging, and thankfully, the tank battles return as well. This time they're handled a little differently. Instead of a basic first-person perspective, you have a third-person one, and you can enter an aiming mode that mimics the original camera angle of COD 1. The tank attack levels are short but sweet, and you can get into all sorts of trouble, and they are not horribly linear either, and there are of course plenty of enemies to fight. Sure, it's not War Thunder, but it sure is fun. But one level that sure is boring is the turret section level. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, Call of Duty 5 would be remiss to not have a turret section, because let's remember, while Call of Duty 5 is still in the same vein as Call of Duty 2, it came out in 2008, and thus it had to have a turret section. You're in a PBY Catalina this time, which is actually one of my favorite World War II planes, and you have to shoot down planes and boats. This is by far the weakest level of the game, and I couldn't wait to finish with it. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention the absolutely famous Nazi zombies. This was the first game to introduce the ever-popular Nazi Zombies mode. This is the game mode where you and friends can fight increasingly hard waves of zombies. You acquire weapons by earning money, and you earn money by killing zombies. This game got amazingly popular, and is still beloved to this day. So it's 2008, right? And the console is supplanting the PC gaming master race. So surely the PC port must be completely shite. Well, it's actually only half shite. There are numerous graphical options and things of that nature, and one of the big selling points for COD 5 was the fact that it had co-op. It's strange to think that most modern games don't actually have it. as legendary games such as Doom and Quake did just as a matter of course. But what makes COD 5 even better is the fact that it has LAN support. Yes indeed, this game allows you to use local area networks. One of the reasons that most modern games multiplayers are so worthless is the fact that they rely on servers hosted by the megacorp behind the game. And thus, when it's no longer economical to keep the servers up, the servers are shut down, and thus you lose half or more of a game you paid for. With LAN, the game can be played online till the bloody singularity. Co-op for COD 5 is pretty bloody fun, and was my main reason for getting the game in the first place, as modern co-op shooters are few and far between. So what exactly is the half-shite of the PC port that I mentioned earlier? Well, it's bugs and performance. This game is amazingly buggy. Case in point, this. As you can see, this guy's AI just broke, and I cannot continue the scene unless I shoot him, even though one of the bots was supposed to do that. And while the enemy's AI is good, sometimes their brains get replaced with Folgers crystals, and they just stand around doing nothing at all. The friendly AI is not nearly as good as COD 2's and will shoot at walls and things of that nature. The game also has many frame rate issues and will at times just randomly freeze for no good reason. This actually makes a bit of sense, since this is a port in an era when the console was considered king, and thus less time was likely spent on it, and they likely had less time to work out all the bugs in general. Even with bugs and things of that nature, the game is still pretty damn good, and it's easy to overlook many of these minor issues. The music and voice acting are also quite exemplary, and I feel that COD 5's music is the best heard in the series. Just have a listen. So now, let's take a look at the rather next-gen story. Next-gen. It means many things to many people. You got better graphics, less complex gameplay, but also darker stories. Call of Duty 2 was a fairly straightforward World War II game. You fight Germans and have a good time while doing it. No one swore, and the darker elements were kept to a minimum. This made COD 2 fun to play and enjoyable all around. But in the intervening years between 2005 and 2008, games had to be more adult. And in the modern era, adult means adding all the fucks and shits possible. I am of course two minds about this. COD 2 didn't really need swearing to show how bad World War II was. So on the one hand, I feel it's unnecessary to add all the fucks and shits, but on the other hand, it's not that big of a deal, as that actually is historically accurate. And this game's story is thankfully not stupidly dark and actually shows events more or less like they really were. In this game, instead of 3 campaigns, there are just 2. You get an American campaign set during the Pacific Theater of Operations, and a Soviet one set on the Eastern Front. Both theaters were very similar to one another in terms of their barbarity. The Japanese were ruthless and tenacious fighters, and the Pacific Theater was a bloodbath. The game, when it begins, does not have you going through some tutorial, as Treyarch actually figured out that by Game 5, its fan base didn't need to be patronized. Instead of a tutorial, it shows the player getting brutalized by some Japanese soldiers, with one poor fellow getting a cigarette to the eye and a knife to the throat. Worse events like this actually happened all the time in the Pacific Theater of Operations. But remember, it was totally a war of Western imperialism. And the game just gets darker from here. The scene we're looking at right now is just the first in a huge number of dark scenes seen in the Soviet campaign. And it really took a lot of testicular fortitude on Treyarch's part to actually portray the Soviets as anything other than just the good guys. The Soviet Union, while a member of the Allies, was certainly not good in any way, shape, or form. They had a dictator that was every bit as bad as Eddie, but actually got away with it. In fact, in the modern era, there are still people that will parade around with his face on banners. Stalin, the man who killed 30 million people, is still venerated as some sort of great statesman in the modern era. However, this game also portrays Soviet soldiers as being individuals, meaning they are not all ready to slaughter prisoners. The Americans versus the Japanese is not jingoism. The Japanese really were that bad in that particular era. This was due to a number of cultural practices and a leadership that corrupted a number of other cultural practices. The Americans really were the good guys on the Pacific Front. And calling an enemy soldier a Tojo is not really equivalent to the Baton Death March. The game actually shows the brutality and horror of World War II, all the while still giving the player a fun experience. Treyarch was able to walk that fine line and was able to show reality without making it a punishment for the player. Do I still recommend Call of Duty World at War? Well, yes. Even though it's a little bit expensive on Steam, it is still worth playing, as the gameplay is still COD excellence. And really, if you need one major reason for getting this game, it's for the co-op campaign, as this game is extraordinarily fun co-op indeed. And so, I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good Modern Warfare 1 and good Modern Warfare 2, or whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed my review of Call of Duty World at War, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you these awesome video game reviews.